Good evening, everybody. I hope everyone's well. We're live now on webcast, yes? Okay, right. My name is Councillor David Beeman, and I'm chairman of this committee. This is the Western Area Planning Committee. And members and officers, please raise your hand to indicate that you wish to speak. Please keep your microphone on mute when you're not speaking. And please can I also ask that any questions that get brief and to the point. We'll be timing speeches this evening, and an alarm will sound when you've been speaking for 4 minutes. Right, let's go. First of all, apologies for absence of substitutes. Kimberly.
Thank you, Chairman. We have apologies from Councillor Dixon, Councillor Keane, Councillor Blishan and Councillor Wicks. And we have Councillors Peter Nicholson and Jerry Hyman substituting.
Thank you very much. I would add that I understand that Councillor Blishan is very ill at the moment, seriously ill. And so I hope we all send our best wishes to him at this point in time. Right, minutes of the last meeting. Can the committee approve the minutes of the last meeting held on the 14th of September and published on the council website as correct? Was it as agreement? Right. Declarations of interest. Anybody made a declaration of interest?
None received prior to the meeting, Chairman.
Questions from members of the public?
None received, Chairman.
Questions from members?
None received, Chairman.
Declarations since last meeting?
Thank you, Chair. There aren't any.
Right. Okay. Right. Well, that means we get on to the main meat of the meeting. I think, as you've all probably received an email from First saying that due to a legal issue, the first 3 items relating to the Islamabad applications have had to be removed at this point in time, and will be covered at a later date to be advised. That's basically it. So shall we move on to the other items? Well, the first one being WA 2022-00978, the land at Green Lane Farm, Green Lane Badshot League, Farnham, an outline planning application with all matters reserved except for access for the erection up to 38 dwellings, including 75% affordable housing and 4 self-built dwellings, with vehicle and pedestrian access, public open space, car parking and landscaping, and the report is presented by Kate.
Thank you very much, Chair. We're just bringing up the presentation here.
We'll get there.
Yeah, we will. Sorry, it's going to take a minute. It's Zoom. Yeah. That's okay.
Those who wait.
Apologies about that.
Right.
Thank you. Oh, we've got an echo, sorry.
Why is that? Thank you.
Does anybody else? Have you got it on? Wait a minute. Can you just check your mic? Go back to
Thank you very much, Chair, and apologies, members, for the technical difficulties there. So this application is for outline planning permission for up to 38 dwellings, including a 75% affordable housing provision and 4 self-build dwellings, and including a new vehicular access, public open space, landscaping and car parking. So here we can see a site plan with the site outlined in red. As you can see, the railway line lies to the east of the site. To the south is Badshotley Road with the cemetery to the opposite side of the road. And to the west is Green Lane. And the plan you can see here shows to the west of the site an open site which is now had a development built out, and I understand it may be occupied at this stage as well. So looking at some, is that not working? Sorry. Oh, thank you. So moving now to some images of the site.
Oh, yeah, it's working.
In the top left-hand corner here, we can see the newly constructed site there, with the cemetery in the foreground. So that this is taken to the side of the cemetery, looking at the junction between Green Lane and Badshotley Road. The image at the top to the right is from within the existing access to the site, which is, as you can see, quite a long driveway off Green Lane. So that would be removed as a result of the proposal, with a new access created onto Badshotley Road itself. The image you can see in the bottom left-hand corner there is of the front boundary of the site onto Badshotley Road. As you can see, it's open currently. And the final image there in the bottom right corner is looking from the north of the site southwards towards Badshotley Road, across the current green space that's there. And just a few more photos here now. This photo to the left is looking to the north towards Crown Lane. So as you can see, there's existing park homes here, an open grassland to the front, with the existing hedge to Green Lane shown to the side of the site there. And finally, the image in the right-hand corner there is of the existing yard, which is to the north of the application site, which has got a number of buildings arranged around a central hard standing area. So here, moving now to the plans, this plan is an indicative site plan. As I said, it's an outline application, so we're not considering the detailed layout at this stage. And the purpose of this plan is to effectively seek to demonstrate that the quantum of development can be accommodated within the site. As you can see, towards the bottom of the site there onto Badshotley Road, a new access would be provided, which is substantially similar to the access which was to be provided with the previous application on the site, which was dismissed at appeal. That was for 50 units. And here's just a close-up of the highways plan detail. If you can see at the bottom there on Badshotley Road, a new crossing would be provided there, and within the site, a landscaped area and leap would be provided near to Badshotley Road. And just a few details to compare the current scheme with the previous appeal scheme, which was dismissed at appeal. The current scheme now proposes 38 units rather than the 50 which were previously proposed. So the density of the scheme has been reduced, but the site area remains the same. In terms of the arrangement of landscaping and open spaces within the site, the indicative plan which has been submitted with this scheme shows an increase in green open space towards the south of the site adjacent to Badshot-Lee Road, which is an area where the previous inspector picked up that there could be improvements. And finally, the key difference between this and the previous scheme from my perspective is that they're now proposing to provide 29 affordable dwellings, which is 75% of the total 38 that was proposed. The previous scheme of 50 dwellings proposed to provide 15 affordable units. Effectively in the planning balance, I afford that substantial weight, the provision of affordable housing, as we have an identified deficit there. And just to sort of quickly run through my main considerations in the recommendation that you have in front of you. One of the key considerations is obviously the impact on landscape and countryside appearance and so on. The development is outside of the built up area boundary, so it can be said that as with the previous appeal scheme, it leads to a degree of coalescence, particularly with Badshot-Lee, and so in that respect it is in conflict with policies of the neighbourhood plan, particularly policy FMP 10 and FMP 11. So that represents a harm of the development. In terms of the provision of affordable housing, which is the next consideration I've listed here, the scheme would, as I've said, provide a very significant level of affordable housing that's above the policy requirement and which could be secured in the Section 106 legal agreement. So from my perspective, that represents a significant planning benefit, particularly within the context of the existing housing supply situation. In terms of residential amenity, the scheme is satisfactory both for existing residents and has the potential to be acceptable for future residents as well in terms of the density. In terms of highways, the Highways Authority Surrey have reviewed the scheme and visited the site and found it to be technically acceptable from their point of view, and have recommended conditions to secure appropriate visibility displays and so on for the access. In terms of biodiversity and impact on the SPA, the relevant consultees are satisfied. The applicant has agreed to provide the relevant contributions to mitigate any potential harm to the SPA by reason of increased recreational pressure. In terms of flooding, the local lead flood authority have indicated that the scheme's acceptable subject to condition. I know that representations have raised issues around groundwater flooding, but the comments from the LLFA have been quite clear that they don't consider that there is any evidence on this site of a significant groundwater flood risk. So it's acceptable in that regard. There are electricity cables within the site, as you probably will have seen in the photos, and representations have raised concern around these and exclusion zones around them. We've consulted with the relevant bodies who've said in effect that those cables need a 3-metre exclusion zone for new buildings. And the indicative plan as submitted does show some small areas of buildings within that zone, but it's obviously an indicative plan. We're not considering the layout in detail, and it's clear that there's potential there for those issues to be easily addressed at reserved matter stage. So it's considered acceptable in that regard. And finally, the site's within a mineral safeguarding area, which is because of its juxtaposition effectively with the surrounding sites and the relatively small size of the site, considered to be acceptable. And finally, if I could just give you some sort of more background information as to how I've reached the recommendation that I have, acknowledging that there is harm, particularly by reason of coalescence between settlements. Effectively, as with all schemes for new housing, we have applied to this application at the current time a tilted balance. So this is in effect the balancing exercise that we do at the end of the assessment. Given that the council currently can't demonstrate a full 5-year housing land supply, the assessment changes slightly, and it has the effect of meaning that the policies which are most relevant to the decision should be considered out of date, and that is policies of the whole of the development plan, including the local plan and the neighbourhood plan. So that doesn't mean that we can't find harm against those policies, and that doesn't mean we can't give that weight. So certainly I would afford weight to conflict with the policies FMP 10 and 11, certainly. But because of the tilted balance, it effectively means that the level of harm needs to be greater in order to substantiate refusal. So I believe the wording is that the harms must significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits of a scheme. And in my assessment of this case, given the significant benefits of the provision of housing, and particularly the over provision of affordable housing, I consider that the scheme is acceptable. And then I'll just go over for you the update sheet, which was, I believe, published on Monday for the application. There are a few verbal updates which I also need to add to this, which I'll say now. The plan numbers referred to in the conditions are slightly out. So conditions 4 and 5 refer to plan ending 106, revision F, but that should be revision E. And condition, I believe it is condition 6 refers to the plan ending 01, which should be revision D. But I can put that in writing for you, Chair, after the meeting. Also, I've realised that I neglected in the report to fill in the information regarding comments received from Surrey Wildlife Trust, but to confirm, they requested additional information which was forthcoming, and upon review of the additional information they confirmed that they had no further comments to make on that, so they haven't placed any objection to the scheme. And also, the final point in terms of verbal update is in relation to the recommendation. So the recommendation is subject to legal agreement, but I haven't stated in there, which I should have, that it would be there would be a time period within which we'd expect that legal agreement to be completed, which would be within 6 months of any resolution being made. And were that not forthcoming, I would also need to add a recommendation B, which would be that permission would be refused after 6 months if the legal agreement wasn't forthcoming. So just following on from those few points, I'll just quickly go through the published update sheet. There's now an extension of timing agreement in place for the determination until Friday. I've just provided some further information here, which I've been through in the presentation with regards to the power lines on the site, and also some further information with regards to noise, which has been found satisfactory by our environmental health colleagues. And then I've also just added a bit more information with regards to transportation, noting the Highway Authority's comments with regards to the opportunity to provide cycleways onto Green Lane. Just confirming that the Highway Authority considered that there's not likely to be a significant increase in vehicular trips associated with the scheme, and that the bus provision surrounding the site is considered to be sufficient. And then following on from that, I've recommended 4 additional conditions which are with regards to noise and lighting effectively. So thank you very much for bearing with me through that. That's just the comments on the update sheet. And I just really would confirm that the recommendation, subject to legal agreements and conditions, is that planning permission is granted. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kate. Right, we have 3 public speakers on this. And the first one is Catherine Powell. Now, Catherine, if you could please come to the speaking desk. And you have 4 minutes from when you start speaking to present your case. Thank you very much.
Councillors, thank you for your time. I've been asked by residents to speak on their behalf to object to this development and request you refuse this application. This site conflicts with the Farnham neighbourhood plan. It is not an allocated site outside the built-up area boundary and in the strategic gap between Webburn and Bagshot Lee, protected by FNP 11. The list of applications associated with this site included in the officer's report is highly selective, completely misses the applicant allowed a grade 2 listed Green Lane farmhouse to fall into disrepair so that it could be delisted in December 2017. Hence no heritage setting concerns. Many reasons for refusal were raised in letters of objection. Not all of them have been addressed in the officer's report or conditions. Two overhead 33 kV power lines on site weren't considered in the original officer's report. No clearance corridor shown on the plans makes them unrealistic. The officer's update sheet states 3 meters clearance, whereas the SSE website states 9. So fewer homes or more crowded layout, still no condition, and the update port is still incomplete. Farnham railway line on the eastern perimeter, Networks Rails comments, developer must approach the asset protection and optimization team pre-commencement to ensure works can be completed without any risk to rail operations. No condition and no mention of this in the officer's report. Foul drainage. Thames Water were consulted. They requested a condition. The report says there will be a condition, no condition in the report or the update. This leads me to ask what issues were also overlooked by the officers. The Environment Agency's surface water flood maps clearly show water running down the hills of North Farnham onto the fields between Webburn and Bagshot Lee, where this site is. The roads turn into rivers even in moderate rain. The Sustainable Drainage Design Guidance only deals with rainfall on the site. The flood risk assessment included by this applicant does not include the impacts of the adjacent development, nor does it mention surface water from the hills. There are groundwater flood risks that show this area at high risk due to the geology under the area. The officer's report does not make it clear that Lead Flood Authority is unable to confirm the actual flood risk, as in their words, unfortunately, the site investigation for this site was done during the summer. They therefore asked for a pre-commencement condition for winter testing to confirm the risk and to ensure that there is evidence that this proposed solution can effectively manage stormwater events with appropriate allowances. This should have been done pre-determination, not as a condition. What will the council do if the evidence shows the development should not proceed? This site is a recognised floodplain bordered by a strategic rail line under or adjacent to 33 kV power lines on a blind bend on a main road between Farnham and Bagshot Lee. Why would people want to live with these issues and challenges? Why has the developer proposed this site with such a high proportion of affordable housing? Increasing the affordable housing percentage significantly reduces the sill payment by at least £500,000 and finds a market for what will be a blighted site. This is not about money, it's about money, not housing need. Councillors, I urge you to refuse this application, safeguard the Farnham neighbourhood plan, safeguard this floodplain for future generations to address the changes that climate change will bring. This site cannot be returned to green space once permission is granted. I have every confidence that you will refuse this application and be thanked by future generations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On the nose, Catherine. The next speaker we got is Thomas Rumble, who is speaking in support of the application. Thomas? You have 4 minutes from when you start speaking.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. As you have heard from your officer, the application proposes the erection of up to 38 dwellings alongside access, public open space, including play areas and landscaping. The application is recommended for approval. This is an outcome of a collaborative approach where we have worked hard to design a scheme where there are no objections from the council's officers, including the local lead flood authority, environmental health, highway, housing and ecology teams. The site forms a well-contained one that is very well located in relation to existing development. Comprehensive tree planting is proposed so to create a green frontage and entrance to this scheme. Further, native tree planting is proposed on the site's boundaries, supplementing the existing, and street tree planting is proposed throughout the scheme, so to create an attractive and green street scene that breaks up the built form. The proposed development of up to 38 dwellings and the inclusion of 2 children's play areas enables a landscape-led development and an appropriate density that positively responds to the site's planning history. In respect of the proposed access, this has been designed to meet highway standards. The scheme proposes an appropriate solution that offers the necessary visibility displays, electric vehicle charging points, cycle parking, and is located in a sustainable location. The County Highway Authority have no objection to the proposals. In respect of drainage, a detailed drainage strategy has been prepared and confirms the site's location in flood zone 1 and that it is at a low risk of flooding from all potential sources. This document and subsequent submissions have been reviewed by the LLFA, who have confirmed no objections to developing the site for flood risk or drainage reasons. Ultimately, in respect of the principle of development, the site is located next to the built-up area boundary and in a sustainable location consistent with the MPPF. Further, the scheme is submitted at a time of housing land supply deficit and where the tilted balance, as detailed in the MPPF, is engaged. Ultimately, housing developments must be permitted adjacent to the borough's largest settlements if that deficit is ever to be rectified. Appeal decision precedent has confirmed that there is a considerable and urgent need for affordable housing, and that such provision should be afforded very significant positive weight. Exceptionally, this proposal offers over 75% of its dwellings as affordable housing. This is in a mix and tenure agreed and supported by the Council's Housing Department. For clarity, that is over double what local plan policy AHN1 would require. In addition, the scheme includes 4 self-build dwellings, ensuring a diverse housing offer that directly contributes towards the council's housing needs where they are most pressing. To conclude, the application represents one that will offer substantial planning benefits adjacent to the borough's largest settlement. Housing permissions are necessary to rectify the housing needs shortage, and there are no objections from the council's officers. This results in the recommendation for approval. I thank you all for your time.
Thank you very much. Again, we're just within the 4 minutes. Thank you very much. Right, we have a third public speaker, which is a ward councillor, Councillor Mark Merriweather. You have 4 minutes now, and you also have the right to speak for 4 minutes after the debate. Councillor Merriweather.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just echo all of Councillor Powell's remarks? This application plainly still in conflict with the Made Neighbourhood Plan, and as to other relevant factors, even for a tilted balance, there's still supposed to be a balance and not some blanket override. So I'm speaking against this application this evening because the recommendation reflects an inappropriate imbalance where the benefits are inflated while the harms, to the extent that they're even discussed, are downplayed. In considering planning history, the report presents some, but not all, of the factors that may be relevant to this application, but even specific only to the prior inspector's findings. The report either doesn't consider them or doesn't present to you arguments that adequately explain how the prior objections have been overcome. In considering housing mix and affordable housing, the report argues that the provision of affordable housing represents a substantial planning benefit, notwithstanding the loss of SIL revenue. But over the last few years, Webber and Badshot Lee alone has provided over 300 homes, 20% of the entire borough total, of which over 40% are affordable. Just next door to this site is Monkton Place, another new development of 43 homes, also outside of the neighbourhood plan, which is shortly to be occupied as affordable housing provided by Astor. Compare that to infrastructure investment. The funding for the Farnham infrastructure programme still isn't identified, and not only is this specific site not nearly as well resourced as the rest of the town, it's not a high enough priority either. The report doesn't capture many of the highways or other infrastructure issues specific to this location, and the notion of a so-called primary bus route operating at peak time service, only one bus every 1 hour and 40 minutes, is laughable. So not nearly enough relative harm is attributed to the loss here of SIL revenue from social housing relief, and the report doesn't even mention that the 4 self-built dwellings may also be eligible for the SIL self-build exemption. Given that the ultimate delivery of any affordable housing is also uncertain at this stage, the limited marginal benefit of the proposed affordable housing must be outweighed by the certain loss of SIL. In considering both design and impact on visual amenity and impact on residential amenity, the report mentions the prior inspector's concern for the effect of proposed development on the character and appearance of the surroundings, including the relationship between settlements. But the prior inspector also specifically cited that the neighbourhood plan recognises that even limited development could undermine the effectiveness of the built-up area boundary in preventing coalescence. This report does not offer you any basis for accepting that the proposed 38 homes is even close to, let alone within, such a stringent limited threshold. Next, as to the report's position in dismissing the significance of the Farnham and Aldershot strategic gap, it's simply unacceptable that the possible change, whatever it may or may not be in a year's time, should be allowed to trump what our actual policy is today. Finally, for now, turning just to the 5-year housing line supply, I believe that the report doesn't allow sufficient weight to the prior inspector's own findings that there remains a sufficient housing land supply to meet the minimum number of dwellings required by the local plan within Farnham, and that the neighbourhood plan has already allowed enough expansion on the edges of Farnham. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Right, you have the opportunity for another 4 minutes at the end if you so wish, Councillor Merriweather. Right, who wants to open the debate? Anybody? Oh, shy. Oh, Councillor Hunt. Are you sure? Councillor Hess.
Good evening, Chair. Evening, colleagues. Well, I'm sure you've all read Farnham Town Council's comments, which really wrap it up, that this isn't a suitable application. The proposed development is on a flood zone. The proposed access is on a dangerous bend in a major road. I tried to cross it recently after a site visit and it was dodgy. It's outside the Farnham built-up area. It's in the strategic gap between Farnham and Badshot Lee, creating coalescence. There's no condition from Thames Water. We have no assurance that the water treatment works can cope with the extra volume of sewerage that will be created. I'd suggest that members ignore the 4th bullet point in the summary, which states the area is now proposed to be removed from the Farnham and Aldershot strategic gap within LPP2, as this is not in force. It's only a proposal. I don't know why they put straw man arguments in, because it's just not applicable. Also, I question the claim that the borough's land supply is under 5 years, when on page 77 of the report, it stated there's a 5.2-year housing land supply. So why do we have to take more unwanted, unplanned for development? This proposed scheme is not an allocated site in the Farnham neighbourhood plan. So really, if you look at it, it's a very comprehensive document that was put together at huge cost over a number of years. A lot of work went into it, and it's an official planning document. And the policies in here have to be considered seriously. They have to be given weight. I mean, what is the point of having a neighbourhood plan which went to referendum if it's going to be ignored? This scheme is contrary to FMP 10 and 11. If this is allowed, it just means there's no planning involved, just opportunistic development that would open the door to more similar unplanned schemes elsewhere in the area. A proposed development on this site was refused, and a subsequent appeal was refused as recently as December 2020. Apart from a fewer units and the offer of so-called low-cost housing, I can't see what has changed on this site. Precious little. It's still an unplanned for development, which is not in the Farnham neighbourhood plan. And I will be voting to refuse this, and I hope my colleagues will do the same. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hunt.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm one of the ward councillors alongside Mark Merriweather, and I've read the report, listened to the officer, and listened to the speakers for and against. And there's a few things that spring to mind, having read the documents and listened to the individuals. And it seems to me that the reduction of the volume that is planned and the increase in affordable housing, I mean, the increase in affordable housing is obviously needed and welcome, but that volume and that percentage of affordable housing wasn't there in the original proposal that was rejected. So clearly, as a sweetener, if you like, or as a convincer to help try and get the proposal approved, you know, they've increased the affordable housing component. But you know, the volume, I mean, the inspector reading through the document said that, I think the summary was, the adverse impacts significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the policies in the framework as a whole. And it seems to me that they're still planning for, they've reduced the volume slightly, but it's still 3/4 of what was planned originally. So it doesn't seem to me that the proposal has changed all that much. In terms of the sort of flood risk and the highways component, I mean, you know, if you're looking at 38 or so units, I mean, you could be looking at 70+ additional cars. You know, I mean, the exact number could be debated, but there's still going to be a significant volume of cars coming out onto those roads, and it's a very tight corner, and they are very narrow roads. And there has been significant development in that area already. And regardless of what the highways individuals say, anybody who lives in that area would be able to tell you, without producing a report on it, that the congestion would be significant. Added to that, anybody who lives in the area could tell you at very little cost and by not needing to produce a document or a report, that it is a flood risk there. Anytime there is any rain at all, the local area in the corner, in particular leading up to David Lloyd, gets completely underwater. You know, climate change was mentioned. You know, I don't know how much the rainfall is going to increase or not, but I can't imagine that that situation is going to be improved by having yet more housing put there. So it seems to me that the level of harm and the adverse impacts that the inspector referred to has not changed at all as a result of the change in this plan that's been put forward. The other thing that I just want to mention as well is something that just really stood out was Councillor Merriweather's comment that 20% of the housing, I think, that's been approved borough-wide has landed in Webber and Badshot Lee. I think that was what he said. I just want to let that sink in, you know, just for a moment. 20% of the whole of the borough, the increase in housing has landed in Webber and Badshot Lee. I mean, that's ridiculous. That's, you think about the size of Waverley, that is an incredible amount for one small area, relatively small area to take. And it seems to me that outside of the specific reasons why this should be declined, this particular area, Webber and Badshot Lee, should not have to take any more development because the character over the last few years has completely changed. So at this stage, that's all I have to say, and needless to say, I can't support this, I'm afraid.
Yeah, Councillor Hunt, I think actually the 20% is meant to be 20% of farm, is that correct?
Not sure exactly the figure that's been referred.
Councillor Hyman?
Yes, if I could, Chair, that would be great. Thank you. So there are obviously a lot of points there, but if I could just come back with a few points of clarification to be clear for the decision. The report does refer to there being a 5.2 year housing land supply, but that's in effect from the last time, which I think is now over a year ago, where we updated the position in a formal document. Since that time, as the report goes on to explain, the council has agreed through various appeal decisions that we don't currently have a 5-year land supply, so that is the current position, that the tilted balance would be engaged. In terms of the comments around a Thames Water recommended condition, that's correct. It appears that that's been deleted in a drafting error, so we would need to recommend an additional condition, which I believe would be condition number 28, in line with the Thames Water comments with regards to foul water supply. And just in terms of the harm which has been identified by officers within the report, the harm has been identified against the policies of the neighbourhood plan, particularly FMP 10 and 11, and it is the case that the scheme would lead to an increased degree of coalescence between settlements, and equally it is also the case that the site does still remain within the strategic boundary, this strategic buffer between the strategic gap between Aldershot and Farnham. So that remains as a harm of the proposal, notwithstanding that it is appropriate for that harm to be slightly reduced potentially in weight from the previous appeal decision, given that local plan part 2 is emerging, because we do have to have regard to the emerging plan, albeit it's not a development plan policy. And then the final point, which I'd just like to come back on, is in relation to the tilted balance in the previous inspector's comments. And it is correct that in the previous appeal decision, as we referred to there in, I believe it was paragraph 32, the previous inspector said for that scheme, he concluded that the adverse impacts significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. That was within a slightly different planning context, but in effect, there's a paragraph 14 in the MPPF states that when a neighbourhood plan has been adopted within 2 years, that has the effect of, to a degree, overriding a tilted balance and tilting it back in the other way. So it would mean that the harms would normally outweigh the benefits within the context of a newly adopted neighbourhood plan. But given now the time that has elapsed, the neighbourhood plan is no longer newly adopted within the context of the NPPF. So that presumption that it would not, that the harms would normally outweigh the benefits effectively is undone. So in that respect, the balance which we're applying, and this is getting quite complicated in terms of the detail of the NPPF policy, but the balance that we're applying now isn't within the same context of the previous inspector. Thank you.
Councillor Hyman.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to thank officers for the explanations that they've given, particularly the last one in respect of paragraph 14 of the NPPF. I think it is very important that we ensure defensible decision making, particularly in respect of this development, because if we go to appeal or judicial review, which is a sort of place this sort of development ends up, it's certainly possible that the local plan part 2 could have been adopted by then, and so I think there is, although I take on board what Councillor Hess says, I do think there's a possibility that it is quite a significant issue in respect of putting the site into the built-up area, the other side of the built-up area boundary, and also the removal of the strategic gap. And of course, that's our problem as councillors. Councillors who are supporting LPP2 are supporting the removal of the strategic gap, which obviously is a difficult issue for us. Therefore, there's a conflict there for a number of councillors, I'm sure. This obviously hinges on the question of whether or not the presumption and the tilted balance of paragraph 11 of the NPPF 2021 apply. And paragraph 182 of the NPPF, people are welcome to check for themselves. It's a matter of fact, it's not my opinion. It's absolutely clear that they do not apply to habitats applications like this unless you've got a complete appropriate assessment. And the law defines it, not my opinion again, it's all in law, and it's in the National Planning Practice Guidance, reference 65-006 from 2019, in respect of the people over wind judgment and how we must, in this chamber and elsewhere, interpret the legislation. It's also in our core strategy, our climate change and sustainability SPD that's going to council next week, and I would certainly recommend that people read the HRA that's within there for that document, because it affects everything that we're doing. Unless someone can put in front of us an appropriate assessment of the effectiveness of the mitigation at Farnham Park, and an appropriate assessment of the SAM strategy, Natural England's strategic access management and monitoring strategy, then we can't lawfully grant consent, and certainly paragraph 182 disapplies the presumption and tilted balance. So it's a matter of fact here. Either the officers and the supporter of the application are correct in saying that it does, that the tilted balance and presumption do apply, or the law and the national planning policy framework, people over wind ruling, are correct, and we have to have an appropriate assessment of whether the mitigation is effective. And we know what the national planning practice guidance says, so I think it's time we stop messing around really on that issue, and people just accept the fact that presumption does not apply here, the tilted balance does not apply. Therefore, all of the policy departures that we see here, particularly in respect of FMP 10, FMP 11, the strategic gap and coalescence, none of those apply, and we are perfectly safe, provided that people accept that they cannot produce for me or for themselves any sort of assessment of the effectiveness of Farnham Park mitigation. Then we refuse on the same grounds as previously, and of course on grounds that there's no appropriate assessment of the impact on the SPA. Just a couple of quick things, also in respect of whether the defensible decision making. The two big issues, I'm a bit disappointed to see highways only gets 2 sentences in the middle on one page. It's the big issue, and of course it's because Surrey Highways are not objecting. I wish sometimes that they would defer to local knowledge, but they're not going to. It would be difficult for us to fight, but we should fight that. And as this is access only, we really ought to be looking at that very closely. That's what we're meant to be looking at tonight, is the access, and we've got 2 sentences on access, which rather surprises me. Surface water flooding, CC4. Also, Surrey, again, the lead local flood authority should perhaps defer to local knowledge as well, but they haven't. It makes it difficult at appeal or further, but in another place, I do think that CC4 and what is it, ST1 are policies which we should refuse on those, as well as the coalescence grounds. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. I don't want to go into habitats.
Probably should clarify.
All right, go on.
Thank you, Chair. Just really to clarify that our position as officers is that the tilted balance does apply. You should be applying a tilted balance. I understand Councillor Hyman's position, but our officer's opinion is that we should be applying a tilted balance. The other, quickly, just a couple of really quick other points. There's been mention of highways and flooding. Now, I would reiterate that neither of those formed reasons for refusal on the previous application, and both of those points have the consultees with a no objection. So I would suggest that would be very difficult to defend on either of those points. But really, just to reiterate that our position is that a tilted balance should be applied. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Martin and Councillor Coburn.
In 2021, Waverley Borough delivered 109% of the 2021 housing delivery test, 1,652 homes. Bagshot Lee delivered 334 homes, 20% of this total. 139 of these 334 homes were affordable, which is 42%. So I think Bagshot Lee is doing enough. I walked down to this site the other day. I looked at the development next door, which is not occupied yet. The engineering that's had to be put in to stop it from flooding is incredible. They're huge ditches. I know this site is a water meadow on the other side. It specifically hasn't been built on for hundreds of years because it takes the riverway excess. I should know, I live on the riverway. And I can't with any conscience vote for a blighted site, which the owners of these homes will have to put up with for years to come. Thank you.
Councillor Coburn.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I am fully aware of paragraph 14, as you know, to your cost. And also I accept that we're looking at tilted balance, but, you know, having been through this before and looking at all the judgments, you've still got to weigh up all the policies, every single one, as you know, and come out with what you think is important. Each of our 4 main settlements is unique, and that's why Waverley is so lovely. Farnham is a collection of villages. It always has been, and you know that's the way it's developed over the years. And they're very distinct areas, which is why we did a design statement when that was the only thing we were allowed to do, and that's what has fed into the neighbourhood plan. So you've got distinct areas all across the town. You've got Rowledge, it has its own village fair. You've got Reckersham Fete, you've got the Bourne Show, you've got Hale Carnival. And Bagshot Lee is just an award-winning community group that just goes from strength to strength with award-winning Tice's Meadow, with buying the kiln and turning it into one of the best community centres, and of course just recently a community garden. So the whole point of Farnham is that it is a group of distinct character areas, and that is what the neighbourhood plan, building on the design statement, was intended to maintain, although still taking 3,005 dwellings, or 2,780 as the minimum, but 3,005 is what is actually in the plan. So when we're looking at the shape of this, to me, you know, FMP 10 and 11 are just so key. You know, the weight that you have to give to them simply because we drew the built-up area boundary around our allocated sites. So we complied with SP 1 and 2, and we drew the built-up area boundary to stop any speculative sites outside that, and to prevent coalescence. And it's coalescence between settlements, not sites. I mean, it's to keep the discrete nature of each of the settlements. So I'm afraid, you know, looking at this, the adjacent site, as we know, got permission on appeal. We were absolutely flabbergasted. I'm not quite sure why we didn't challenge it, because quite frankly, as I think it was Councillor Martin said, I mean, it's always been sort of land that's been used for recreation, informal and more formalised at times. And obviously for Surrey to get access to minerals if they wanted it. And it, you know, it never dawned on us it would even ever get built on. And then they allowed the one very close to the sewage works, very close to flooding. I mean, it is not an ideal place for residential, which is why it wasn't included. I think the officer, correct me if I'm wrong, I do apologise, mentioned policies 10 and 11, but of course it flies in the face of FNP 14 as well, because it is not a selected site. And also FNP 1, because that states quite clearly that we do not want building outside built-up area boundary to avoid coalescence. So, you know, there was a structure to this when we did the plan, and it wasn't just plucking stuff out of the air. It was to maintain the separation of the discrete settlements. And to a greater or lesser extent, it has succeeded. So when I look at the balance of this, we've got so many affordable homes in Badshot-Lee, and I won't go over all what everybody else has said. And quite frankly, you know, I cannot see any reason to build on this site outside a built-up area boundary when you've got a made neighbourhood plan. Yes, paragraph 14 doesn't click in, but looking at some of the Gladman judgments, I mean, these people had 3.2 years, and he still said that the weight to be given to the policies in a neighbourhood plan, you know, if it were an up-to-date neighbourhood plan, and the plan is up to date, the fact that it's not within 2 years doesn't make it an out-of-date neighbourhood plan. And local plan part 1 is still up to date. And that is what, of course, the neighbourhood plan is predicated on. We were allocated 2780, we produced the plan to deliver them. And no single site during local plan part 2 examination was mentioned in Farnham. The inspector took it as read that local plan part 1 and the Farnham neighbourhood plan were not going to be revisited. So I can understand where we are in terms of balance. I just feel that the policies that we are trying to protect, it's not some sort of flimsy policy, you know, it's for a specific reason that is so important to the whole character of the town. So I'm afraid I would go right back to the inspector's previous comments, because apart from the policy change of 14, the aim of these policies, the neighbourhood plan, and indeed of the local plan with the TD1, RE1 and RE3, I mean, they're all part of it, but certainly I think the 10, 11, 1 and 14, the 4 policies that are really driven, well, there's a horse and coaches going through them if we allow this. And I think that's too far. I think they deserve more weight than that in the process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Deere.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have sympathy for the people who produced the Farnham neighbourhood plan. I really do. But they are not a collective Moses handing down tablets of stone from the mount. It's not a question of if it's in the plan, it's acceptable and we don't have to think about it. And if it's not in the plan, we don't have to think about it either, because it's obviously not acceptable. Planning is more complicated than that. I've taken Councillor Coburn's advice and looked at a satellite image of this area, and it seems to be characterised by a patchwork of green and settlement areas, of which this, I don't think, really adversely compromises that sort of layout. We have to bear in mind that the Farnham neighbourhood plan, as a result of not having a 5-year housing land supply, which is a simple statement of fact, as we've heard a number of times tonight, is out of date, as is the one in my own town, in Hazelmere, as is the one in anywhere else that's got a made neighbourhood plan. Those days have gone as a result of the failure of this borough to produce a 5-year housing land supply. I've read Mr. McCreary's or Ms. McCreary's inspector's report, which in the circumstances of the time, I mean, I have to say I didn't agree with it, but what I agree with doesn't matter. But in the circumstances of the time was a very emphatic document, but I think those circumstances have changed. And as a result of which we cannot rely on the matters that were that were stated as the reasons for refusal at the last appeal. As I say, I've been on I did the site visit with a number of my colleagues. It's a piece of land between a very busy railway line and an existing housing development that's just recently been completed. And I really can't see any defensible reason not to give this consent. I can see lots of political reasons, but I try and look at these things from the point of view of material planning considerations. And my genuinely objective view of that is that I will go with the officer's recommendation and say this is acceptable as far as I'm concerned. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Is there any other candidate who hasn't spoken wish to speak? Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I ask the officer a question? I've been reading the McCreary appeal document carefully, and I appreciate the change of circumstances involving paragraph 14. But I read his or her judgment to suggest that the application of paragraph 14 was not the only reason why the conclusion was reached that there were adverse impacts which significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. Do you think I'm right, or do you think that was the key factor?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, and that is a very good question. So if I go to the relevant part of the appeal decision, he or she is speaking that in paragraphs 30 to 32. They state that they, having considered the evidence, they conclude that the adverse impacts significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. And they don't, within that paragraph where they're stating that, list all the different things that they've considered. So I think it is a reasonable conclusion that they will have considered other things, particularly the degree of harm that they found and so on. But I'd also say that it is clear that they did consider the engagement of paragraph 14, which would mean that in general, the harms would normally be considered the significantly and demonstrably outweigh the harm. So I think the answer is there. Yes, they will have considered other things in the balance. They will have considered the whole judgment, but they will have considered a presumption under paragraph 14, which doesn't remain in place currently. Thank you.
Thank you very much. No, I rather agree. And I think if the only factor which had led to the decision to dismiss the appeal had been the application of paragraph 14, then I would have agreed with my colleague, Councillor Dear, and felt there was really no defensible reason for refusing this. But having looked at what else has changed, changing the numbers of units from 50 to 38 will not make much of a difference to the urbanizing impact or to the coalescence. And indeed, given that the inspector at paragraph 25 made reference to the fact the addition of up to 50 houses was a contribution, then obviously 38 houses is a slightly smaller contribution. So I think, to use the word on balance carefully, whenever you've got a recent appeal decision on precisely the same site, that always guides me very strongly as to how we should decide. And I think, as the officer has rightly pointed out, I don't think it was just paragraph 14 that drove the inspector. And I don't think other things would change so much that my conclusion is that there are still adequate reasons to say that the adverse impacts significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the policies and the framework as a whole. So I think we should refuse, and it's up to the applicant, if they want to go to appeal and get another inspector to resolve this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And finally, Councillor Neil.
Thank you, Chair. I've listened to all the arguments, obviously, and in particular to the counter argument coming from Councillor Deere here. I haven't got much to add in that I support most of the arguments that have been put here. I would just say that in terms of the neighbourhood plan does identify sufficient sites for Farnham. So on that basis, I believe that there's no real need to have an allocation of housing on this particular site. We should stick to the allocated sites as part of the overall balance of decision. So I won't be supporting the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Right. Right. We've been talking about this for an hour, okay, and that is very specific, Jay.
Yes, just one very quick question on regarding the social housing unit. On page 68 of the officer report, it tells us there's one 4-bed unit would be social rent. I'm aware we've got an affordable housing SPD and that we've just updated that. And because I'm unable to remember it word for word, could officers, I know they say that this is in accordance with the affordable housing policies, which are in LPP1, but AH1 and AH2, if I remember correctly. But what does the affordable housing SPD say in respect of that? Because that there would, I am just concerned that I thought we were asking for 50-50 social rent and whatever, but I can't remember the exact wording, whether it's a should or a must or a could be or whatever. And the other issue, of course, is that if you've got an assessment of the effectiveness of Farnham Park as saying, then you have to provide it. Please don't tell me that the law and the MPPG are wrong, because all I'm telling you is what they say.
Okay. Do you want to answer that, Keir?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm afraid I don't know the exact wording of the SPD. And in terms of the context there, I believe we're currently out to consultation on a new document which hasn't yet been adopted. And effectively, our housing team have been seeking the provisions of the emerging document when they're sort of identifying on a site-by-site basis what is the most appropriate mix, because it can get very complicated with the different tenures and different unit sizes. The mix proposed here, which includes one 4-bed social rent unit, has been agreed by our housing enabling officers. And it's correct that we have identified a need for social housing rather than affordable rent, which is in effect different in the level that the rents are capped at. But equally, that quite often will have viability implications. So I understand it's a preference rather than an absolute or a policy requirement. So I think in effect the short answer there is that the affordable housing officer is agreed with our housing enabling team. And I would just reiterate really to members in undertaking the planning balance here that the provision of affordable housing has in several recent appeal decisions been afforded substantial weight. So I would just be clear in reaching a conclusion that you have considered the benefit of the provision of affordable housing specifically, and not just the provision of affordable housing numbers. And indeed, the affordable housing here is an over provision well above the policy requirement, which would go towards meeting local needs. Thank you.
Right. You have another 4 minutes to sum up if you wish.
Thank you, Chair. Listen, this is an important application where the harms and the benefits deserve a thorough examination, and I'm very grateful to everybody, all of the members of this committee, for giving it that. I'd just like to pick up on a couple of points. I'm grateful to Councillor Martin for picking up on specifically some of the issues to do with the flood zone. It's unbelievable to me that this is not of a concern to the flood authority. Anyone who's had the opportunity to see the man-made sinkholes that had to be retrofitted in front of Monkton Place should agree with me that they are just a very, very nasty accident waiting to happen in such a public place. And nobody looks forward to that outcome. As far as Councillor Powell's concerned, I want to echo the reservations she had about some of the comments just summarised in the report from the consultees and also the community representations. That may not have found their way into detailed consideration. Otherwise, members, I'd just like to sum up by saying this. The communities in the villages of Webburn and Badshot have done their bit and been very proactive in the identification of local development sites. All they ask in return is that the resulting planning policies be applied. Otherwise, approving this application could seriously undermine our local plans and give encouragement for yet more unwanted and unnecessary speculative development. So while I commend to you specifically the wording of the objection of Farnham Town Council, in fact, I still believe that so very little of relevance has actually substantively changed enough since the last application went to appeal. I actually find myself paraphrasing the inspector's own findings. I believe this proposed development would still be in conflict with the development plan, and there are still no material considerations which justify granting planning permission in this case. This proposed development would still result in harm to the character and appearance of the surroundings, including the relationship between settlements. It still conflicts with policies RE1 and RE3 of the local plan, Safe Policy C4 of the Waverley Borough local plan, and policies FNP1, FNP10, FNP11, and I believe FNP14 of the Farnham neighbourhood plan, which collectively still seek to safeguard the character of the area, protect the natural features of sites, limit development in the area outside the built-up area boundary, and prevent coalescence between areas. Thank you all very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Councillor Merriweather. Right, we move to the recommendation, which I shall now read. Subject to conditions, including the additional conditions which have been mentioned by Kate Edwards.
24 to 28.
And also Thames Water.
Yes, that would be condition number 28.
Okay, informative and a legal agreement to secure the provision of affordable housing, maintenance of play space and public open space, and Thames Basin heat avoidance measures contributions. The decision for the application for permission be outline approval. Those who wish to vote in favour, please raise their hands.
Thank you, Chairman.
Those against, please raise their hands. Anybody wish to abstain? As a result, please, Kimberly.
Thank you, Chairman. That's 1 in favour, 11 against, and no abstentions. Therefore, the application has failed.
Therefore, we need an alternative recommendation, obviously. Does anybody wish to propose an alternative recommendation? Mr. Hyman?
I move that, that permission be refused.
And reasons for refusal, we now need to agree. And I think this has been. Kate, do you want to add something here?
I think that's for us.
Reasons here.
Yes, so if members are looking to refuse, I would recommend refusal reasons in relation to the previous decision the council made, omitting one reference to ecological benefits, which isn't relevant within the current context, but I'd effectively recommend the 3 refusal reasons which were applied to the previous appeal. The first being due to the quantum of development proposed and the urbanising impact of the proposed access and the resulting hedgerow loss, the proposal would fail to enhance the landscape value or protect the intrinsic character and beauty of the countryside, and would contribute to the coalescence of settlements and the erosion of the landscape character of the strategic gap. The proposal would therefore be contrary to policies FMP1, FMP10, FMP11, and I would also add to that one FMP14, as you mentioned it, Councillor Coburn, of the Farnham Neighbourhood Plan, and policies RE1, RE3 of the 2018 Local Plan Part 1, and the Farnham Design Statement. And then there would also need to be refusal reasons, and I can provide detailed wording if needed, but refusal reasons in relation to the absence of a legal agreement to secure mitigations for the various things raised in the recommendation, and separately for the lack of mitigation measures for the SANG without a legal agreement. I can provide detailed wording if you'd like.
Is everybody happy with that? Does anyone happy with that?
Can we add C4 to the strategic gap and coalescence ones, because I think that was in there last time. Is there any reason we shouldn't? It's retained 2018 from the 2002 or not?
Yes, we'll just check on that point whether that policy is still extant, because we don't have quite the same retained policies now, as I understand. So we'll just check that point. Thank you.
Okay, can we add CC4 and ST1, which are the roads and transport and flooding? Because I think all members seem to be agreed on those, and although it would be disagreeing with the local authorities that have responsibility for them, I think we're entitled to.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair. This is the point that I was making clear earlier, that actually, and it's kind of highlighted by Kate reading the reasons for refusal of the previous scheme, that actually we would be introducing a new technical reason in both those instances that weren't reasons for refusal before. And on top of that, we have comments from the relevant consultees that suggest that there's a no objection. So I would actually strongly suggest that that would be not a defendable position. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chairman. I take on board exactly what Mr. French is saying, but we've seen a number of decisions made at appeal where the inspector fully understands that it is positioned that even if a previous ruling has or appeal decision has not made a decision on certain grounds, it is his responsibility to look at all of the grounds and revisit those if necessary. And I do think that you know, from what you've heard from our local knowledge, certainly this committee, I believe, feels that Surrey County Council, in its roles as the Transport Authority and as the lead local flood authority, has not demonstrated a local knowledge sufficient to be able to come to the decisions that they came to, the opinions that they came to in respect of flooding and transport, particularly the safety of the junction that's proposed. And also, of course, there's the issue of the hedgerow, which is I don't know whether that's been covered properly. You know that I will always also state that People Over Wind has ruled that signing a Section 106 agreement, spending some money, agreeing to pay some money, does not remove the obligation to conduct a complete appropriate assessment, which we haven't got. So simply saying that in the absence of a Section 106 agreement isn't good enough. It's in the absence of an appropriate assessment. Otherwise, we're just trying to evade the law. And the question is, of course, are we saying that the MPPG and the law are wrong? Because I think a lot of people are.
Well, I think as I mean, I think the point that Chris French has made about the fact that the other points of all, you know, the statutory consultees not objected is very relevant. But would you ever talk to the other points?
Yes, Chair. I just say that we don't have immediately to hand the up-to-date list of the retained policies, which has been altered in association with local plan part 2. So I don't have the answer on C4, but we can check whether that's still extant and add it if necessary, if it is.
If it's still extant, we can add it if necessary. Okay,
Yes.
fine. Okay, well, as I say, I think, can we just go over again what were the reasons for what we're proposing? Sorry about this.
So this is from the previous refusal reason. Due to the quantum of development proposed and the urbanising impact of the proposed access and the resulting hedgerow loss, the proposal would fail to enhance the landscape value or protect the intrinsic character and beauty of the countryside, and would contribute to the coalescence of settlements and the erosion of the landscape character of the strategic gap. The proposal would therefore be contrary to policies FMP1, FMP10, FMP11 and FMP14 of the Farnham Neighbourhood Plan, policies RE1 and RE3 of the Local Plan Part 1 and the Farnham Design Statement. And we, if the policy is still extant, we'll also be able to add in a reference to policies, retain policy C4 of the 2002 plan.
Right. Thank you very much. I propose that we vote on that. Yes. Those in favour of those reasons, can you please raise their hands? Those against, oh, sorry. Okay, Kimberly.
Yeah, thank you.
Those against? Abstain. Okay, right. Yes, Kimberly, the result.
Can I just clarify, Councillor Dear, you abstained, yes? Thank you. So that's 10 in favour, none against and 2 abstentions, Chairman, so that's carried.
Thank you very much. Well then, the application is therefore refused on those grounds. Can we move on, please? Next item is WA 2022-01237, the land at 3 Downing Street. This is lot fine, it is in fact the Lost Boy now, Farnham. And this is Carl who's going to present. And this is for the erection of a detached bar survey, which incidentally is a retrospective application and external.
Thank you, Chairman, and good evening, members. This application is the erection of a detached bar servery and external lighting at 3 Downing Street in Farnham. The site is located in Farnham town centre and in the conservation area. The host building is also a grade 2 star listed building. As you can see from the aerial photo, you've got sort of shops sort of up here to the north. You've got residential units here to the east and parking to the west. And here you can see the site plan. So on the it's not orientated north. So on the left hand side, you've got the host building. You sort of come out into the garden area. You can see the proposed lighting sort of zigzagging along here, and the bar sort of servery area there in the middle. This is photo A, so it shows the building as Councillor Beeman highlighted. It is retrospective, so it has been built. It's sort of single story timber buildings with a hatch sort of opening out there, and that's sort of the other angle of the building. And so yeah, these are the elevations as well, so obviously depict what's there on site. So the main matters for consideration are the impact on the heritage assets and design. Our heritage officer has had no objections to it and has identified no harm, and Historic England also were consulted due to the host building being grade 2 star listed and had no further comments. With regards to impact on residential amenity, our Environmental Health Department have been consulted regarding the lighting and any sort of additional noise, and have raised no objections subject to the conditions located in the officer report, restricting the hours of use of both the bar, servery and the lighting. Thank you, Chairman. And officers are recommending approval.
Thank you very much, Carl. Very succinct. Now, there are two public speakers on this item. The first being Sophie Bernard, who I believe is online. Yes, Kimberly. Sophie, you have 4 minutes when you start speaking. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for allowing me to address you with our concerns. So I'm Sophie Bernard, Chairman of St Andrews Court Management Company, and I'm here this evening to represent at their request the residents and property owners of St Andrews Court. I wish to make 3 opening points. Firstly, this planning application is retrospective, which means that the Lost Boy or Oakmanins, who should and in fact do know better, went ahead and erected a sizable garden bar without first applying for consent. Secondly, among the St Andrews Court residents, we have a number of families, some with long-term health conditions, some elderly, and some who work from home. Thirdly, the residents and property owners of St Andrews Court purchased and or moved into their homes while number 3 Downing Street, currently occupied by the Lost Boy, was used as law offices or was occupied by Lockfine, a quiet restaurant with extremely limited use of the patio and no use at all of the garden. It was not a pub as it is now. This was a quiet environment where neighbours were respectful of each other's space and privacy. This planning application has 2 parts to it. First is the garden bar, which we are opposing as it would unavoidably increase the noise levels in the garden and patio. As it is during the past 2 summers and also during the winter of 2020-21, the noise from customers in the outdoor areas has led to such significant and repeated disturbance to the residents of St Andrews Court that I have had to log many noise complaints to the Environmental Health Department. The garden is now effectively a beer garden. The noise level is systematically correlated to the number of customers in the outdoor areas and to the consumption of alcohol. The bar will make this worse as it will allow more customers to drink more alcohol. The Lost Boy is, after all, a pub and dining establishment in that order and as clearly advertised on their frontispiece. The proposed garden bar is large enough to allow 3 to 4 members of staff to serve drinks, not food, at any one point. We're also certain that this bar would make it even more difficult for staff to enforce hours of use as they already regularly fail to do so. I simply cannot ring the Lost Boy every night and log a complaint with Environmental Health every day. We understand the Lost Boys wish to further increase their takings, but would ask the members of this committee to consider how they would feel if this were to take place next door to their home and garden. The second part of this planning application relates to the outdoor lighting already installed, and which we would not necessarily object to as long as, first, it is low-powered lighting, and this would mean changing the very bright light position in the bin locale outside the Lost Boys' kitchens, and which is currently pointing straight at St Andrews Court. And secondly, as long as the low-powered lighting is switched off as soon as the garden and patios are not in use, i.e. from 10 p.m. at the latest. In conclusion, we, the residents of St Andrews Court, strongly object to the already installed bar and lighting and urge you to refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sophie. Now, the other public speaker is Simon Millett. Simon, you're online too. You have 4 minutes from when you start speaking, Simon.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, councillors. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the applicant, Open Inns and Restaurants this evening. There is not much to add to the officer's report and presentation, so I will briefly just highlight and re-emphasise the main points from the applicant's perspective. The modest proposals were in response to the COVID-19 pandemic and an urgent customer demand for an improved outside seating offer. This demand remains, and such facilities are commonplace in outside seating areas. The Lost Boy has an especially long garden, and the staff travel time from main restaurant bar servery, which is located towards the front of the building, does not allow for the level of customer service which the applicant prides itself on or which customers expect. The proposals do not increase the capacity of the garden. Instead, they allow for improved customer service, surveillance and management of it. The proposed hours of use of the servery and low-level lighting are consistent with and limited to that already controlling the use of the garden. Previous planning permissions do not prevent external lighting, only make it clear that planning permission is required for it. The Council's Environmental Health Officer finds the proposals acceptable subject to conditions 3 and 4, which the applicant accepts. The applicant is aware that some neighbours have concerns, and the applicant would therefore also accept a condition preventing the moving of glasses and waste in the outside areas beyond the garden's hours of use should it be considered appropriate. The applicant would also be happy to meet with neighbours and the Council's Environmental Health Officer to discuss any concerns should it be considered appropriate. This application is recommended for approval by your planning officers. We therefore hope you can help support this town centre business this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Simon. Right. Which any councillor wishes to speak on this item?
Thank you, Chair. Difficult one, this, because on the one hand, I would personally like to support any hospitality business in the town centre. And this particular company do the job very well. I have to say that it's so popular that it's at capacity a lot of the time. I don't know how they could cram any more people in, and the garden does get noisy already, very noisy. And I do understand the lady, I can't read your name, madam, but the lady who was speaking earlier, is it Sophie?
Sophie Bénard,
Bénard. Yes, I really do sympathise with neighbours that are affected, especially when establishments change from a quiet restaurant like Loch Fyne to quite a busy pub with a real buzz. Now, I think towns like Farnham need pubs with a busy buzz. It gives the town some life, and it's very good for the commercial life of the town. But you've got to set that off against the quality of life of people that live in the vicinity who will be affected by these activities. So it's a very difficult balancing act. And I must admit, I'm quite torn about this because on the one hand, I think, as I said earlier, it's a successful and nice place to go to, but you've got to think about the people that live nearby who are somewhat trapped in their homes if they're within earshot of the noise. And I've been in that garden myself in the summertime when the noise levels have been quite horrendous, to be quite honest with you. It's hard to hear what somebody next to you is saying. So, as I said, I've got huge sympathy for the residents. And whilst I think this is just basically a cabin in the garden that'll be a servery, I'm a bit concerned about stoking up even more noise, even more people pouring in. They're almost at tipping over point now. So difficult one. I'm probably inclined to refuse this personally, but very conflicted. That's really all I've got to say at the moment. I'll listen to other comments from colleagues. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hunt and then Councillor Hyman.
Thank you, Chair. So I agree with a lot of what Councillor Hess has just said, actually. It's a decent pub and restaurant. The garden behind does get really busy. People want to enjoy themselves and, God knows they want to get out and about after the last few years. I've got a lot of sympathy with the residents and the comments that have been expressed. You know, as Councillor Hess mentioned, if you're living in a property long term and the you know, the business locally changes hands and it becomes something different to what it was, and all of a sudden you've got a lot of noise coming in, then that's not, you know, ideal by any means. I do have a question, which is if there have been some complaints made to environmental health, what's the outcome of that been, and do the officers know about it or know what the outcome was? You know, to be honest, I feel exactly the same as Councillor Hess. You know, it's a good business, it's a really good pub, people want to enjoy themselves, that's fantastic, but it shouldn't be to the detriment of other people that live nearby. And I'd like to know also whether there are any conditions, if this was to be granted, as to what hours attendees in the beer garden need to be cleared out of that garden by, not just when the bar actually shuts. Because if one of the issues is noise, it doesn't really matter whether the bar is there or not. If there are people in the garden, then, you know, they're going to be making noise. So actually, you know, one of the conditions that would make sense to me would be to have anyone who's sat in the garden, they would need to clear out, you know, irrespective of whether the bar is actually in the beer garden or not. So I'd just be interested to hear about that, and what was the outcome of the environmental health complaints as well. Thank you.
I'll let the officers answer those questions, please.
Thank you, Chairman. So in section 3 of the relevant planning history, there's application WA 2019-0004, which has an hours of use condition on the whole garden, because there was sort of landscaping going on there. And then, so there's, and then the same hours of use are proposed on the bar servery subject to this application and the lighting. So that's 8 till 10. And then with regards to the environmental health investigations and everything, I don't know what the outcomes have been, but I do know they are aware and sort of aware of complaints, but I'm not sure what the outcome of their investigations are. Thank you.
Councillor Hyman.
Thanks. Yes, I feel similarly conflicted as Councillor Hess, and I do wonder somehow how the local residents put up with it, because I had my son used to live 3 doors down effectively from it, and it was extremely noisy at times. But I do appreciate that what was done during the COVID era, so to speak, and I don't see that we should go back on that and undo things which a lot of people think are a benefit. The question that has been put, I think in respect of the hours, is it possible for us, I'd like clarification please, is it possible for us to put in place a condition, would it be reasonable, that says that you do have to clear the gardens? I know we've got a condition down there finishes at 10, and I know that Sophie Bernal has said, has asked, you know, effectively, can we enforce, please, the 10 p.m. limit there? But that doesn't stop people making a lot of noise after 10 o'clock at night. So is it possible for us to put in place as a condition, retrospectively or whatever, that people are not allowed to be in the garden, you know, after hours? That's, I know we have conditions like that. We put one in at the Fox, I think, didn't we, a few years ago? I'm pretty sure in the Bourne, that people had to clear out of the garden at a certain time. I don't know whether that would be excessively punitive to the business, because if people are outside being very quiet, then I wouldn't want to punish to stop that. But and we can't police things on, you know, 24 hours a day, or even just during pub opening hours. We can't police it. So I'd like that clarifying, because I do think that actually there is a big issue with the noise from that pub. There is another matter, if I could, which on page 99, I might be a bit flaky on this one. Paragraph 11, flood zones 2 and 3, just looked to me like where it says at the end of the first paragraph, it would be raised above the existing ground floor level. That means you're raising land levels. And the next paragraph says not increasing the risk of flooding elsewhere, which is what raising land levels does. And that to me sounds like another contradiction here, which I'd just like some, I appreciate it would probably only be 10 cubic meters or something like that, but are we contradicting ourselves in what we say there? And but has that, is LLFA, whatever, aware of that and happy with it? Thanks.
Thank you, Chairman. The application, as I assume, is for the building bit. I assume licensing, which I sit on, has different policies. And if the garden is licensed up until a certain time, everybody can sit there and make their noise up until that time. They have conditions that you have to stop drinking at such a time and you've got half an hour to vacate that area. And it might be a different licensing in the garden to what's inside the actual pub or the restaurant itself. So that, in my view, is licensing and not the planning. This is for the building that we're looking at, which is, you know, they can't serve from it after 10 o'clock at night, and the lighting has to go off at 10 o'clock at night. But whether people are drinking in the garden is licensing and not planning, in my view. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Martin.
If I'm really conflicted with it because I actually go and sit in that garden. I can't. Do I declare an interest?
You're very quiet though, aren't you?
I'm quiet, but I don't sit right at the back. I sit there. Couldn't there put some temporary, could we put some more conditions in so there's some temporary noise curtains, because there are some pagodas out there, pergolas, whatever you call them, which could be erected while protecting the listed wall, because I know there's a listed wall along there. And we also suggest a condition that to employ noise attenuation measures. Could we do something like that?
Come back on those questions, yes.
Thank you, Chair. There's a few questions that I think we probably ought to clarify. One is the fact that we have got a no objection from environmental health. Whilst we're putting conditions on this application that relate to the hours of operation, I think, as we said before, though, it wouldn't be reasonable to apply conditions that don't relate to this specific proposal. So to apply conditions in relation to the whole garden area when those are covered under a separate consent wouldn't be reasonable, but they are covered under a separate permission in terms of the hours of use of the garden. The other point in terms of flood risk, I'm not, based on what we've got in front of us and the scale of the proposal and it being a low risk use in terms of it not being a residential use that's being proposed, is not. I would suggest that in terms of flood risk, it's acceptable. The conditioning further screening, I think, would probably not be proportionate to what we're looking at, and I'm not convinced it would actually address noise significantly. So I think the main point in terms of noise is that we put an hours of use condition on, and there's a no objection position from environmental health, but that does not stop them from looking into any noise issues under their legislation if there was found to be a statutory nuisance. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I also have a lot of sympathy for the neighbours and their concerns and the imposition of the growth of noise with the Lost Boys success. It is, of course, one of the perils of living in a town centre, potential noise level. But I go back really to Councillor James's point, which I was perhaps going to follow up on, that the application is for the erection of the servery and the lighting. And it does seem to me that the issues that we're concerned about are more to do with the licensing conditions than this particular planning application. It seems to me that the essence of the planning application is difficult to refuse unless, of course, we were overly concerned about the retrospective nature of it. So I think on balance, I would want to support this application. Thank you.
Any other councillor wish to speak on this item? All right, George, if it's a quick one, yeah.
Actually, it's a question, Chair. I just wondered whether residents have got the ability, when there is a noise issue, to go through environmental health to get sound level monitoring. I know this is happening somewhere else in Farnham. I won't name names, but where the decibel levels are above a certain amount, they can actually put a stop notice on the activities. So if the noise levels were above a certain permissible level, the lost boy could have his activities curtailed potentially through environmental health. Now, am I right or am I off the mark there? Can anybody help?
I'm sure Mr. French is going to come with the answer, yes?
Thank you, Chair. I don't know the exact method they use to measure these things, but they obviously can continue to act under their legislation should there be a should there be an issue. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to speak? Okay, well, we have to move to the recommendation. Subject to conditions 1 to 4 and informative permission be granted. Those in favour, please raise their hands. And those against? Abstain? The result, please, Kimberly. Are we adding up all right? Application is therefore granted. Shall we move on to the third application tonight, which is not in Farnham. WA 2022-01642, the land at 18 Wickham Road, erection of workshop building within residential gardens, change of use from residential to mixed use, residential light industrial use class E, saddlery. And it's Carl Lewson again to present, Carl.
Thank you, Chair. Just share the screen. So this application proposes the erection of a workshop building along with this change of use from residential to a mix of residential and light industrial for use class E as a saddlery. The site is located in a developed area of Hazelmere. You can see the areas residential in character, sort of mix of dwellings surrounding the area. And from the aerial view, yeah, you can see the wider area, sort of fairly verdant, yeah, with dwellings surrounding. So this is the site plan where the proposed workshop building is located to the very rear of number 18 of its garden area. And this is a picture of the building as it is a retrospective application. So you see single story in stature, black timber cladding. And then again, here are the sort of elevations that showing what we've just shown, showing what you've just seen. Yeah, number of windows on the front elevation. So the main matters consideration here is the design impact on visual amenity, the impact on neighbours and how the proposed use would impact them. So we've had comments from Highways, the Waste and Recycling Officer, and environmental health who are sort of agreeable to the development, subject to conditions limiting sort of various factors of it. So I think officers are concluding there is no sort of detrimental impact to neighbouring amenity. So, and as such, officers are recommending for approval. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Well, another public speaker who's been waiting patiently, I think. Chris Berry, you have 4 minutes to speak when you start speaking. Well, 4 minutes when you start speaking. Thank you very much.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, councillors. I'm here to represent Mr. Hastelow for the application that's just been discussed. Just for some background, Hastelow and Sons are a long-established third-generation bespoke saddlery company and have been working in the Haslemere area for some 39 years. When the COVID pandemic was identified, everybody was encouraged to work from home, and with this in mind, Mr. Hastelow decided to move the business to his home address during 2019. In doing so, he was not aware that the planning permission was required, as he already had a similar size shed at the bottom of his garden in an identical location as the proposed workshop. Therefore, he was somewhat alarmed when he received the letter advising him that a breach of planning law may have occurred. Hence this application. Mr. Hastelow employs a full-time apprentice and one other operative on a part-time basis of 16 hours a week. That's the operative, not the apprentice. The apprentice is full-time. The case officer's report covers all aspects with regards planning, highways and environmental health, but we would like to address the objections from both Mrs. Sharland, an immediate neighbour, and the parish council. Excuse me. To qualify Mrs. Sharland's objections, the nail gun she refers to is used intermittently during the working day for approximately 1 hour in total, and is not used at weekends or in the evening, as Mr. Hastelow does not work weekends or evenings. The only hazardous materials on the site are contact spray adhesive, which can be obtained from any builders merchants, and all glues that are used are water-based, and the premises has all fire prevention equipment in place and was inspected and signed off by the fire brigade before any work commenced. The company does not generate any industrial waste as such, just leather offcuts. These are donated to local schools and the sewing room here in Godalming. Mr. Hastelow has the same number of bins as any other resident and are put out on the collection day. How they are put back is at the discretion of the refuse collectors, but are moved back off the footpath as soon as possible. There are 2 off-street parking spaces and 2 others. Deliveries from DPD do occur from time to time, just like any other residents in this area of online shopping. The workshop is approximately 150 millimetres above the rear fence, causing no overshadowing, and there's no rear or roof windows which could impinge on privacy. Referring to the parish council comment regarding setting precedents, I'm sure all applications are viewed and considered on their merits, and therefore the only precedent being set here would be for something similar in size and function. Use Class E light industrial hardly relates to a small saddlery business with 3 people, but that was the only class available to us. In summing up, we believe that Mr. Hastelow acted responsibly in moving his business during the COVID pandemic and has continued to make saddles and provide an apprenticeship and other employment in a manner that is agreeable with his immediate neighbours, which the many letters of support can confirm. We believe that the application should be approved by the committee in line with the case officer's recommendations and attached conditions 1 and 6. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, who wishes to be Councillor Hyman is first off the mark.
Yeah, thanks. I just wondered, this has been referred to us. What were the planning reasons for us for it being referred to us? Is there something I've missed? Because I fully support local enterprise like this and the reasons given for it being moved to home, and I support the officer decision. But is there something I've missed there?
No, the reason that the application the reason the application had to come to committee was because there was 5 letters of support
Because it met the threshold to come to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, when it came to the town council, we discussed this at considerable length, and I think there was a great weight of opinion that we were all in favour of small businesses, and Saddlereed sounds very charming, doesn't it? But this is a sort of wholly and exclusively residential area, basically. And we've heard today that we've got a nail gun going for an hour. We've got 3 people, presumably with associated parking on site. There's a gruesomely unattractive building within inches of the boundary of the back of the garden. And in planning terms, I think the committee felt this was an unacceptable use in an entirely residential district. And in terms of setting precedent, we have no, if we grant this, we've got no alternative but to consign Wakeham Road to all sorts of strange ghettos of little industrial workshops and people pottering around in their back gardens for personal profit, which is I'm all in favour of. But my view is that the business has clearly supported business premises in the past, and out of respect for the residential area in which it now operates, it should go and do so again. Thank you.
Does anybody else wish to speak? Yes, Councillor Cooper.
It's just really a question if somebody could answer, not necessarily now, but I am surrounded by buildings in gardens, as everybody else is, and they're getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Whenever I've queried them on behalf of residents, I've been told that they fit within permitted development. So, if we could have some clarity on that, not now. I'm quite happy with this application as it stands, but it is something I would like to know, because it isn't just people who are making a living out of this. I mean, my neighbour makes so much noise, it's unbelievable. He doesn't earn a penny from that business. So, I'm just intrigued as to what is the limit now? And back to the environmental health, that's where I have been sent, as it were, if I have a problem on behalf of residents with the noise. So, it's the same sort of issue. But yeah, at some point, if I could have clarity on that, I'd very much appreciate it. Thank you.
I'm sure that would provide. I've got Councillor Hess and Councillor Rubini wish to speak. Councillor Hess.
Thank you, Chair. I think the gentleman that spoke in favour of this a few minutes ago put a very good case. Like Councillor Hyman, I'm very much in favour of small businesses, family businesses, craft businesses. Goodness only knows it's hard enough to run a small business when times are good, but times have been so hard, and I understand the argument for moving to home, because that was a government, I don't know if you can call it policy or edict, but certainly small businesses and people were encouraged to work from home if they could. This business obviously could work from home and have set up there. I think to call it ghettos of little workshops is a little bit harsh, to be honest with you. It's a little bit unkind, but I think we should be encouraging small business, because from small acorns do great oaks grow. And that is what this country needs. It needs enterprise, it needs growth business, and I can't see much wrong with this at all. But one thing I would say is that if there is any aspect of noise pollution coming from a nail gun, perhaps building regs could be consulted as to what sort of sound insulation could be put in to the building, which could muffle that. Again, we've got to think about neighbours and their amenity. But in the round, I'm very supportive of this kind of business. Saddlery is very close to my heart. I'm not declaring a non-pecuniary interest, but I would say that 35 years ago, I qualified as a saddler. And so I know what's involved, and I wish this business much success. Thank you, Chair.
You learn a little every day, don't you? Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. I thought long and hard at the Hazelwood Town Council, etc. And I live on the same estate as this one's on. And I had no idea it was there. I walked past it, I've driven past it many times. I heard no noises, I saw no delivery trucks that were in the way, and I certainly didn't see any refuse bins that would obstruct pavements, etc. So it's at the bottom of the garden. I would not have seen the building. As far as I'm concerned, I think I agree with those that say that we need to encourage small business, providing it doesn't in future allow for that business to change if and when these people move on. And I wouldn't like to see something else taken on those premises that perhaps could be much more noisy. However, I'm told with the condition there to make sure it is a salary, then it shouldn't be able to be changed. So with that condition on there, I'd be happy to support it. Thank you.
Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I think this type of development does have to be considered case by case. So I understand the point made by Councillor Dare on this one. Taking it further, I think there's four main parts to this. The first is the noise and waste. That could be a problem, but it has been looked at, and officers are quite happy on that aspect of it. So I'm moving on to condition 5 on page 111, the times of operation. I think this is very important because it's starting at 8 and finishing at 5, and we wouldn't want it to be any further than that. That is a core time, and that core time must be respected. So that's an important point. The final point is the parking in the road. That parking is extremely tight in this part of the world, and so when I saw this, I thought I'm a bit concerned about this, but I've heard from the applicant that they do have some off-street parking, and as it's during the working hours, it would be a little, it would be easier. Certainly would be happy about any parking outside working hours. So all in all, on balance, I support it.
I think in relation to your question, Councillor, we need condition 3 covers it, yes. Anyone else wish to speak? Or shall I move to the recommendation? I think we'll move to the recommendation that subject to conditions 1 to 6 and informative permission be granted. Those in favour, please raise their hands. And those against. Abstain.
Thank you, Chairman. That's 11 in favour, 1 against and no abstentions. So
Then the application is granted. Thank you very much. Right. Our last application tonight that we're considering, which is WA 2020 back to Farnham 00141, the land at 36 Field End, Farnham, GU 998Z, an outline application with all matters reserved except layout for erection of detached dwelling as amended by the plan received on the 11th of April 2022 and the 5th of May 2022. Carl, to present again.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, so this application is an outline application with all matters reserved except for layout for the erection of a detached dwelling at 36 Field End in Farnham. So the site is located within the built-up area of Farnham. It's located within a quite dense residential area. As you can see from the location plans, quite a variety of sort of the layout of the dwellings. The site itself is situated within the part of the garden area of number 36, which is located just here. And from the aerial view, you get the layout of the wider estate. So this is the site plan. You see, it'd be for a single unit sort of on the site. And then this is photo A. Is situated looking west towards the road over there. This photo is looking south towards a sort of neighbouring garage, and then this is taken from Field End Road looking north, looking east towards the site. And then it's just more photos sort of just showing the residential nature of the area. And then obviously these are the indicative elevations. It is a reserved matter, but this is what it could look like a dwelling on the site. And then these are the proposed floor plans, because layout isn't a reserved matter. So these would be the floor plans that are proposed. See, it's a 1-bed dwelling. So the main matters for consideration here are the design and impact on visual amenity and sort of impact on neighbouring amenity. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Carl. Well, we have 3 public speakers on this item, and the first one being all online, I presume. Helena Dunaway, Helena, you have 4 minutes to speak when you start. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you. I am speaking on behalf of the 22 neighbours that have raised objections, and these are the following reasons. The original Field End developer, Crudis Homes, built the estate with dwellings mixed in size and with no more than 4 to a row, which were then placed in a way that minimised the overlooking of other houses. They also purposely left green spaces to individual properties to maintain. The new build is not in keeping with the existing layout and design of the estate. The new build will generate increased traffic in and out of the cul-de-sac. Parking is already an issue. All the houses in Field End were built with allocated parking spaces of 1 to 2 per house. Many residents have more than 1 car nowadays, so have to park in the road. This congestion has caused issues for emergency vehicles and refuse trucks unable to enter the cul-de-sac. Additionally, the proposed new parking space of the new build will remove up to 3 roadside parking spaces and be situated round a blind bend and directly opposite a pedestrian footpath. This will cause safety issues for the children riding their bicycles round the bend and down the footpath, for pedestrians using the footpath, and also for the elderly accessing the bungalows opposite. As the car space for the new build will be reversing out in between parked cars either side and opposite the alleyway. Also, the 2-storey house will overlook and cause a loss of privacy for residents at number 11 and 10 Penfold Croft and numbers 1, 37 and 38 Field End. The resident at 38 Field End has a young child and does childminding and is particularly concerned about loss of privacy. The layout and density of the building, the proposed build is squeezed into a back garden with minimal space around either side of the property. The new build is overdeveloping an already overpopulated area. There are plenty of other new developments within the nearby area in Badshot-Lee, such as the Green Lane Meadows of 105 new homes and the Monkton Place development of 40 plus homes at the entrance of our cul-de-sac at Hurlands Place. The other relevant planning considerations, the existing wall, which is due to be knocked down to provide rear access for the proposed development. The existing wall, which was built in 1983 by Crudis Homes, is the wall that needs to be removed, and it curves around the back garden of number 36 and comes into an angle at number 37. But the way of the angle is shown on the proposed plan is incorrect, and therefore the required 2 metre visibility splay, as required by Surrey Highways, is not complied with. I've informed Waverley Borough Council of this, and they said they would have the plan amended to reflect the situation on the ground. This has not yet been done, and therefore Surrey Highways requirements have not been complied with. The wall along the back actually measures 9 metres in total, but according to the proposed plan, the required measurements add up to 10 metres. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. The next public speaker is Julian Cox, who I believe is also online. Julian, you have 4 minutes when you start speaking.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. I'm the agent speaking on behalf of the applicant. As you are aware, this application is recommended for approval by your officers as they have considered it to be policy compliant. We reiterate that the application is an outline application only, and only layout has been submitted for approval at this time. The precise details of the design will be subject to a separate application. However, it was felt that applying for consent for the principle of a residential dwelling was appropriate at this time. The property at 36 Field End contains a large rear garden that presents an excellent opportunity for development, as it will maintain a more than usable rear garden for the host property whilst providing enough amenity space for the proposed dwelling. The proposed dwelling will make a small but positive contribution to the council's 5-year housing supply position, which, as I'm sure members are aware, currently has a shortfall. The local area has a mixture of house and plot sizes. Therefore, we believe the proposed plot size and the remaining host plot size is in keeping with the character of the area. We have noted the various matters raised in representation and understand that planning officers have taken these into consideration in making their recommendations. It is right that these issues that have a material consideration in planning terms are considered carefully, and as such have been deemed to be policy compliant by the planning officers. We would, however, like to take the opportunity to address some of the issues raised in the letters of representation in turn. Highway safety and access. The proposed scheme has been amended to comply with highways requirements in terms of parking and visibility displays. Therefore, we believe that it does not have an impact on any aspect of highway safety. The scheme provides for off-street parking in compliance with current parking standards and will not affect emergency vehicle access. Amenity of neighbouring properties. We believe the proposed scheme will not impact on any neighbouring residential amenity. The only neighbouring properties that are likely to be affected are 10 Penfold Croft and the host property itself. The proposed dwelling can be designed to ensure that there are no first floor windows overlooking either of the rear gardens. Out of character with the estate. I'm sure members are aware there are similar properties in Penfield Close and in Field End itself, where the existing houses are either located virtually at the back edge of the footpath or set back only 2 to 3 metres. Proposed dwelling is within similar parameters. Refuse collection. The proposal has ample space within the curtilage of the site to store the appropriate wheelie bins and can be collected curbside on bin collection days along with other existing properties. We'd also like to address the comments raised by the Farnham Town Council. Comments dated 27th of April seem to be inaccurate as they describe the host property as having a small amenity space, whereas in fact it's one of the larger rear gardens in terms of square metres in the immediate area. In addition, their comments suggest that the proposed access to Field End is at the junction with Penfold Croft, whereas it's actually more than 30 metres away from Penfield Croft. And as mentioned previously, this has been agreed by Highways Authority to be acceptable. In addition, I would like to go on to say where the Town Council describes the landscape buffer at the rear of the site is slightly misleading, as there's currently only a brick wall, a brick boundary wall, and then the footpath, which is to be expected in a built-up environment. However, the proposed scheme does allow for space within the frontage of the plot for a landscaping or a landscape buffer, which we believe will enhance the visual amenity of this part of Field End. Finally, we disagree with their description that the application is shoehorned into an existing area, but rather is making effective use of land as required by the National Planning Policy Framework. We note that should approval be granted tonight, it is subject to the signing of a Section 106 agreement pertaining to the SPA contributions, which the applicant is in the process of finalising. To conclude, as mentioned previously, the application is policy compliant, makes a contribution to the Council's housing deficit, and is recommended for approval by your officers. Thank you very much for listening and for giving me the opportunity to speak regarding this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jude. Right, the ward councillor, Councillor Mark Merriweather, wishes to speak. You have 4 minutes before, and of course, as before, 4 minutes afterwards. Councillor Merriweather.
Thanks again, Chair. And once again, I'm speaking against this application. I'd like to endorse the remarks from Helena Dunaway and commend to you the objection filed by Farnham Town Council. It's comprehensive and self-explanatory, and I'm not going to repeat it verbatim now, but I would like to emphasise just a couple of points. The report states that this area of Field End and Penfold Croft is mixed in terms of character and layout of dwellings. But apart from a handful of semi-detached single-storey bungalows, the area is almost entirely semi-detached and terraced, full 2-storey family homes. And in fact, this proposed dwelling would stick out like a sore little finger in terms of size and design as perhaps the only detached what looks like 1.5-storey single bedroom dwelling in the neighbourhood. But so much of the glazing would have to be contemplated as having to be obscured for privacy only emphasises how claustrophobic and inappropriate the location of the proposal is. Not only that, but as the report itself says, the dwelling itself will be smaller than design standards allow, which is something which should be wholly unacceptable anywhere in this borough or anywhere else for that matter. The frontage of the proposed dwelling will be exactly at the boundary of Field End and Penfold Croft. From the road, that aspect is currently to the outside of the established walled garden, that wall having been built by the original developer with the existing homes at the same time nearly 40 years ago. This wall will be demolished, thereby permanently changing the character of the street scene. That wall is also significant, as Helena said, because it extends in from the road and between numbers 36 and 37. I'm concerned that the site plan in your pack may be misleading because it portrays to the northwestern corner of the subdivided plot, marked in red, as belonging to number 36, when in fact the wall crosses that corner and cuts it off, so that the corner presented physically lies within the curtilage of the neighbouring number 37, and has done so since the wall was built. This could also mean that the pedestrian visibility zone referred to in condition 7 could only be defined by including that neighbouring land, thereby perhaps imposing on the neighbour a condition to which that neighbour is not a party and may not even be enforceable. So I'm afraid there's no reasonable basis to conclude on an appropriate balance that this development would not be out of character with the wider pattern of development or would not be detrimental to neighbours. It's quite the opposite. And so I ask you, please, to refuse it. Thank you all for your attention.
Thank you very much. Obviously, you have 4 minutes afterwards if you so wish. Right, any councillor wish to speak on this item? Oh, yeah. Oh, he's busy writing. Yes.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I was nodding off there. No, I wasn't really. No, not really. Not really. I was just jotting things down. Well, I've listened to what Councillor Merriweather said about this, and I think they're all very relevant points. Smaller than design standards. That's not good. Small, thin, detached house, out of character with the other properties. It does strike me as a shoehorn, to be quite honest. It may be a fairly large garden plot, but nevertheless, it does come across as being jammed in. And also there's a lot of public objections to this, as eloquently stated by the lady earlier. So I have got severe reservations about this one. Thank you, Chair.
Right, Councillor Hyman, then Councillor Coburn. Councillor Hyman.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, well, thank Ms Dunaway for her presentation, and I take that on board. I do agree with Farnham Town Council's objection in respect of this. I don't see how I could possibly vote in favour of it, unfortunately. So I would refer members to page 119. At the bottom of page 119, the report says that refers to people over wind, and then says the opposite, saying that we haven't got an appropriate assessment of the effectiveness of Farnham Park, as saying, but we'll take a contribution and that'll overcome the law. That's precisely, obviously, what people over wind said you can't do. You can't just make things up and pretend. And of course, I'm stating what the MPPG says and what the law says. So if you say I'm wrong, it's the law and the MPPG that's wrong. I'm afraid people, that's what some people here would have you believe. I'll be voting against this on those grounds. Thanks.
Councillor Coburn.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'm very uneasy about this, and I really didn't need the town council's objection. I just looked at the picture and sort of shuddered a bit. It is so tiny, and I, as you know, I don't like frosted glass other than in loos, and only there if you really don't have your blinds. You know, I really don't like obscure glazing. Never have done. I think it shows a bad design. If you can't put a house on a plot without having to obscure certain habitable rooms, I just don't think it should be acceptable. But to me, it is just, I mean, trying to avoid using the word shoehorn, but I can't think of another one. It is a small plot and a very small house. And yes, I know we need every house, and my instinct is always within the built-up area boundary to go for additional housing, but I'm afraid I think this is just too much of a cramped development. I think the amenity for both the existing residents, but also for the people that are, or person that's going to live in this house. I'm sorry, I really can't support this one. It's just far too cramped.
It's Councillor Martin first.
I'm just going to ask a question. The car can only reverse backwards out. It has no way of coming out in forward gear. I thought that was against planning. on new builds.
Carl?
Thank you, Chair. The space is shown on the site plan, and the Highway Authority have looked at the plan in quite a bit of detail. I know what you're saying, that there isn't a turning area.
There's no turning area.
Shown on there, but they've.
So it's going to reverse out onto a cul-de-sac with a pedestrian footpath opposite between two parked cars.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, just really to clarify, there's no objection from the Highway Authority. That's all I can say on that particular point. And in terms of the comments they've given, they are quite they have given a detailed comment on it. So yeah, there's a no objection from them. The other point I would make is that whilst we say there is a shortfall in terms of the nationally described space standard, it is a very minor shortfall that has been identified. We haven't got a policy that would at the moment, without part 2 in place, that would allow for us to refuse on that point. The other areas that I'm hearing discussion on in terms of character do seem like matters of judgment. Thank you, Chair.
Matters of judgment, right?
So, Chairman, may I just point out that the recommendation, as with the previous, as with the development round the corner at the farm at Green Lane Farm, the recommendation that we've got in front of us is inadequate and needs to be an A and a B, and subject to that may be irrelevant to the decision, but nevertheless it should be changed.
We appreciate that, actually.
Could the officer put the street scene back up, which showed the development, which as far as I remember, all the houses looked identical? I'm really sorry to bother you, because then this little house with gables and stuff is nothing like what was built around the corner. That one there, right? So Chairman, am I led to believe that the design of this little bit with gables and little frilly windows and a porch is in keeping with all that? And I think the other one is a quart in a pint pot.
Yeah, I was this is an outline application anyway, but I mean, wait, do you want to answer that question?
Thank you, Chair. Obviously we would expect a design that would have to come forward, so we'd have to be satisfied that an appropriate design could come forward, but it wouldn't necessarily be tied to the design that they've shown us here, because that's a reserved matter at the moment.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, I really just agree with what everybody's said. I mean, it does look as though, I hate to use the phrase, but it is a house that's being shoehorned into an area that doesn't seem to be appropriate for the size. And, just in respect of concerned about the space inside, I mean, I noticed that the officer said that, it's only marginally smaller, I think, than the guidelines state. I mean, the rules are there for a reason. If it's within the rule, if it's outside of the rule, then it's outside of the rule. Otherwise, it sounds a little bit like breaking the law in a limited and specific way, but that's something else entirely. So I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to support it. Thanks.
I think Lewis wants to come in with comment. Lewis?
Thank you, Chairman. I just remind members that the space standards were brought in through a written ministerial statement some time ago. If I recall correctly, that statement did advise local planning authorities that they should incorporate them into their planning policy if they wanted to rely on them for reasons to refuse planning applications. So I would caution members not to attach too much weight to the small issue with the space standards. And if they were minded to refuse, I would caution them against relying on that as a reason to refuse.
Which is an application anyway, isn't it? Yes. Yeah. Okay. Right, okay. Everybody else? Then we move to the recommendation that subject to conditions 1 to 13 and Information 1.5 and the section 106 securing SBA contribution, subject to the amendments quite rightly pointed out by Councillor Hammond, outline permission be granted. Those in favour, please raise their hands. Right. Any abstentions? Right, what's the result? Anybody know?
Thank you. It's none in favour, 12 against and no abstentions. Thank you.
So we need to propose an alternative. Who wishes to propose an alternative recommendation? Councillor Coburn proposes. Anybody wish a second? Oh, well, it's close call. Don't fight over it. Oh, Councillor Martin, right. Reasons. Right. Oh, well, I've got some reasons here. Can you, what you suggest?
So we've got one sort of relating to the impact on sort of the character of the area. So the proposed development would be overdevelopment of the plot, cramped and contrived and out of character with a pattern of development. And development would be contrary to policy TD1 of local plan 2018, FMP1 of the Farnham neighbourhood plan and D1 and D4 of the local plan 2002. Thank you, Chairman.
Is everybody happy with that? Yep. Could we vote on that, please? Those in favour?
No, I abstain. Sorry, I said put my hand up. Because you wouldn't give us the opportunity to object on grounds of habitats, which is the law. So I have to abstain.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I think that concludes the meeting. Well, I have two. One item. As you know, we've got a meeting planned for next Wednesday, the 19th. Sorry. Yeah. Now, at the moment, I'm afraid there's only one application as substantive to that meeting, and I think we're going to look as to whether we can defer that to the following meeting, aren't we? Well, we'll have a
Just to clarify, Councillor Coburn, there was two, but there is that one of them's the bicycle store's been pulled. I did.
Yeah. I'm sorry, we just read it, but there's only one at the moment. I just seem rather crazy. If we can avoid it, but I won't be here anyway. But I mean, because I'm in Manchester, but no less. And the second, and the other point I'd like to make, I'm sure we would all like to wish Councillor Bishop a speedy recovery, and we ought to record that. Thank you very much. Other than that, I was home. Thank you.